Welcome into the New Orleans Saints podcast, presented by SeatGeek. You'll hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and writers that cover the NFL on a daily basis. The New Orleans Saints podcast starts right now. Here's your host, Erin Summers.
Welcome into the New Orleans Saints podcast. I'm Erin Summers. We're continuing our draft series as we head into the draft April 24th, looking at different prospects in different positions. And today we're doing something a little different. We're bringing in Ross Jackson because, I mean, let's be honest, he knows everything about everything. And I needed somebody to talk to me about tight ends today. And Ross, before we get into it, I just need you to kind of give me a summary of what you're up to these days, because it is hard to keep track.
Yeah, we got a lot going on. First of all, thanks so much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be able to be here with you and to be able to chat with you. You can find me on the Locked On Saints podcast, which features two shows, the daily Locked On Saints podcast, as well as every Monday and Thursday, the Saints Squad, which features myself, Saints Wire's Dylan Sanders, Athlon Sports' John Hendricks, as well as former New Orleans Saints wide receiver Lance Moore. You can find all the written work that I do over at louisianasports.net as the Saints beat writer there. And you can find it all in one place, the easiest way, on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA and OLA.
How is Lance? Is he trying to really talk up his guys now that he's in the 18th world?
He's playing a very clean game, and we love him for it. No, he's been awesome. He's been excellent. And obviously, you know, him being able to step into that next career as a certified agent in the NFL, everything's been so cool. He's got several players in this year's draft. It's been really awesome to just kind of hear about his journey.
Yeah, I'm sure it gives you a different perspective on some things too.
Big time.
So getting into the tight ends, obviously Penn State's Tyler Warren has been the one that's been at the top of everyone's rankings. When you look at the group here, why is he your number one when it comes to basically every tight end ranking I've seen out there?
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of the consensus guy. He's the number one tight end in this draft on my board. There are some dissenting opinions around it, which is good. You want those dissenting opinions, especially when it comes to, you know, different conversations in draft rooms and scouts and things like that. But I mean, when it comes to Tyler Warren, it's just the eclecticism of his game. 104 receptions, 1,233 receiving yards, and 8 touchdowns last season with the Penn State Nittany Lions is the focus of that passing game. But also had, you know, 20 plus rushes for over 200 rushing yards and another, you know, just under a handful of rushing touchdowns, threw a touchdown last year as well. It's just the remarkable flexibility and versatility of his game. Is he going to be asked to be a wildcat quarterback in the NFL? It depends on the system that he goes to. But outside of that, his ability to be able to play in line, meaning that he's like tucked in right next to the offensive tackles, in the slot, or all the way out wide, like you would see a wide receiver, that alone, in terms of his versatility to be able to do all those things, makes him a kind of a can't miss candidate in this year's draft as a playmaker.
You brought up his ability to get in there, like in the slot as a receiver, rusher and passer. But I think a lot of the adjectives that you hear now with tight ends is he's a receiving tight end and not so much a blocking tight end as what we've seen in the past. How have you seen the position evolve and maybe what people are looking for change?
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a lot of people that want, and look, different teams are going to want different things too. Different systems are going to require different types of fits. But, you know, you see a lot now of these collegiate tight ends coming into the NFL that are polished pass catchers, in some cases polished route runners as well, but need to learn run protection, need to learn pass protection, need to learn how to block with better maybe technique than they were asked to in college and things like that. That's not entirely uncommon, but it's something that I think now the receiving prowess of guys like Brock Bowers and things like that who come into the league is certainly more appealing. And I think the other thing that shifted too, Aaron, is the expectation of size. It used to be that 6'6", 6'7" tight ends were the marquee, you know, types of players, but now you're looking at kind of 6'3", 6'4" guys being perfectly acceptable first round, second round investments at the position. So I think those are two major shifts that we've seen at the position in terms of the expectations making that leap and that transition from college to the pros.
It's funny that you bring that up because when I was talking to Juwan Johnson, who just recently signed that 3-year extension with the Saints, he mentioned how he's not that big of a guy, and he changed from receiver to tight end, and he's going up against offensive or defensive linemen that are twice his size. And I'm looking at him like, Juwan, you look pretty big to me. Like you are kind of a big guy. But
Yeah.
it is interesting though that even he views himself as smaller for a tight end when you're being asked to block and hold your ground. When you look at the next few tight ends that may be coming off the board, the Michigan's Colston Loveland, you have Miami's Elijah Arroyo. Those guys though have been slated as receiving tight ends.
Yeah, absolutely. Loveland coming out of Michigan is one of the more polished route runners at the position. And I think the truth of the matter is when it comes to him, when it comes to Tyler Warren, when it comes to Elijah Arroyo, you probably don't want those guys one-on-one with defensive ends, but typically you try to avoid that being a part of your game plan as an offense anyway. The bigger piece is, can they contribute for you as additional blockers in the run game? And sometimes that's all about a willingness. Sometimes it's about just being in position and having your number, your jersey numbers on your back towards that running back to give them a lane to be able to cut through and things like that. And so I think those are the things that you look for on tape and that you can find with a Colston Loveland, even though he's considered more of a receiving tight end. But he certainly maybe fits a little bit more of the traditional, what we would call like a true Y tight end, a guy that lines up in line, that stays tight to the formation, but has the flexibility and versatility to be able to move around. While Warren and Arroyo would probably be more of what you typically referred to as kind of F move tight ends, guys that you can move all around the formation, do a bunch of different things with, have them do split action releases out of the backfield and all this other stuff. And so it's just kind of this fun thing of like these different types of chess pieces that you can now find at the tight end position as that position continues to grow and the talent continues to grow from college to the pros and all these things. But both those guys certainly more so receiving tight ends, but I think you look for, do they have what it takes to be able to maybe grow a little bit as a blocker so that you can have them on the field for more looks, more downs, more situations, things like that.
LSU's Mason Taylor is somebody that has started to rise in conversations around who and where you might draft him, like who would go before him, after him. He's kind of around that 3 spot right now. Some people have him around the 5th tight end that goes off the board, but it does seem like he's starting to climb. People have said, I hate saying they because it's like, who is that? But it's been out there that some people think he needs to put on a little more size. And maybe that's something that they're hoping that he can do, but they still like what he brings to the table. I know you saw him at his pro day at LSU. What do you like about him?
Yeah, he's another guy that I look at, and I would personally say, oh, what more size? What do you mean?
No,
like he's
he
massive.
looks big out there.
Right. And then he moved extremely well also, right? He comes in at, I think it's 6'4" and he's in the 240 range. I think that's probably pretty solid in terms of what it is that you're looking for at the position. Maybe you can bump him up into the 250 range more solidly. And we got to remember sometimes too, that where these guys work out, where they like the weight at which they work out, the weight at which they test, the weight at which they do their off-season prep might be different than the weight that they actually play at once they get to, game mode, if you will, and things like that. So some of that might be inherent to what his process is, but running a 4.65 and, leaping and giving you 28 bench reps and showing the strength along with the athleticism and the explosion and things like that. I think that's the reason why you saw and why we're seeing all of the they conversations around Mason Taylor really skyrocketing up boards. Like he went from being a late day 2 guy in the 3rd round to being somebody that you might have to invest in the 2nd round in order to be able to get. And a bit of that is the attitude that he brings. He's got a NFL pedigree as well, of course. And then him coming in and being a guy that can, be that 50-50 jump ball winner in the end zone, go up there and be bigger than the safeties and defensive backs that he might be lining up with, but then be faster than the linebackers that he's going up against in the middle of the field. That's really, really interesting. And obviously something that teams would covet, along with the fact that he is somebody that will go out there and block and do some of the dirty work too.
A lot of the prognosticators, the mock drafts have said that the Saints should select a tight end at some point. You see that as a need for them?
I think so. I mean, maybe not necessarily a need, like the 3-year deal to bring back Juwan Johnson gives you kind of a place for your future to head. And he's somebody that obviously this team has invested in multiple times over at this point. And with this new coaching staff and everything, I think that that's going to all be able to play to Juwan Johnson's strengths a bit. And so I think the other thing that you're looking at, though, is that as of right now, Foster Moreau's in a contract year. Taysom Hill's in a contract year. Both those guys coming off of injuries as well. So I think you're looking at just preparing for your future at the position. If you're the New Orleans Saints, I could see that being a logical thing to do just based on the situation of the entire, or the circumstance rather, of the entire position group as a whole. You got to be ready when you're going into these drafts in 2025. You're not just looking for somebody to help you in 2025. You're going, okay, what can this person be in 2026, 2027, 2028? Like, you're looking at that whole expanse of the rookie contract. And I think that's something that you could see this team potentially take into consideration at the position this year.
As we move into later in the draft, day 2, 3, 4, heck, even, over the weekend, Saturdays rounds, and the Saints are needing somebody, who are some of the names we should be looking out for?
Yeah, I've got 3 like late round guys that I really like in this year's draft, one of which has already been connected to New Orleans. So I'll start with him, Nebraska Cornhuskers tight end Thomas Fidone, the second. He's the guy that comes in and has, a little bit of the all around tag at tight end, does a little bit of blocking, but is also, or not a little bit of blocking, blocks very well. He's in that Cornhuskers offense. You're playing in Nebraska, you better be able to block. And so, him having that while also being a guy that is, a pretty good athlete and a polished receiver with safe hands. I think that he's one that I would watch for in day 3. Arande Gadsden, also the second. There's a lot of seconds in this year's draft, not as many juniors. He's coming in out of Syracuse. Probably he's a converted wide receiver, a la Juwan Johnson. So somebody that is of the type and of the style of tight end that we know this organization is comfortable with. Good route runner, good contested catch guy, big hands, all those things. So I think that those are or reliable hands. I think those are kind of the biggest attributes for him. Maybe not so much a powerful blocker, though, so maybe that's too much of a leap late in the third, but I'm late in day 3, but he's somebody that I really like as well. And then I'll finish with Mitchell Evans. Notre Dame has been a program that we've watched New Orleans go back to a few times over the course of the recent past. There's something about that pedigree that they like when you have a head coach like they have over there, and Coach Freeman too. You obviously want to be able to work with those guys. But Mitchell Evans is an interesting one because he's a watch the film guy. He doesn't have a ton of stats. Doesn't have a ton of things that jump off the board at you when it comes to his stat line. But when you watch him on tape and you see that, Notre Dame's offense just didn't go to its tight end very much, you can kind of see where he's working into the open areas of the field. He's, running good routes. He's, moving well and kind of the short area quickness piece of the game where you're having to change direction and things like that. He just shows you a lot of promising things on tape while also, again, being a willing blocker, that I think that if you're looking for somebody from a raw traits standpoint, even if the stat line doesn't match up, he could be a really interesting candidate for you just in terms of what his skill set looks like.
Sounds kind of like somebody that we grabbed that was undrafted in Dallin Holker. He had some of those flashy moments and has the traits, and he stuck around. So, the Saints are not afraid to try out some guys that didn't get drafted, and they've done very well with their undrafted free agents, and a lot of them have stuck around for a while. Since I do have you, and it's the Saints podcast, can you want to just kind of give me your thoughts on this whole Shedeur Sanders Saints drafting him quarterback situation that seems to have just kind of like taken over the last couple of days?
Yeah, man, the momentum around Shedeur has been so funny, or not so funny, but it's been so like remarkable to see. And it's been really interesting to watch. I would say that momentum wise, there's 2 big names when it comes to quarterback for the New Orleans Saints draft. And there's the consistent momentum and the sustained momentum, which felt like that's been Ole Miss quarterback Jackson Dart from the very beginning of the draft process. But the sort of peak of momentum is absolutely here right now when it comes to Colorado passer Shedeur Sanders. Look, I don't know if the Saints are, super in on Shedeur or super out on Shedeur, or where they really sit on the spectrum when it comes to him. But I will say this, he's a really, really talented passer, and he's a passer that is more accurate and more, and maybe shows better elite ball placement than he is a strong-armed passer. And so some people will develop feelings about that in whichever way they want to go. But in the NFL, amongst all of it, if you can throw it 70 yards all you want, but if you can't throw it 70 yards and hit your target, you're not doing me much good as an NFL organization. And so accuracy is all, right? And so seeing him as a potential for the New Orleans Saints at number 9, I still think he goes off the board early, whether it's to Cleveland at 2, New York at 3, even Las Vegas at 6. I don't believe that any of those 3 teams have long-term solutions at the quarterback position, even with some recent free agent acquisitions and even a trade for the Raiders. I think, again, you're not just looking at 2025, you're looking at way longer than that, especially with a quarterback in the first round. And so I could see any of those teams doing it. I could see a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers trying to trade up as well to be able to go and get their guy. So I think it's a tall task for New Orleans if they want to stick and pick at 9 and hope that Shura Sanders is there. But if he is there, it's just good business. It's good business to go out and grab one of the best quarterbacks in this year's draft without having to move around. If he's there for you, it's going to be really tough for them to pass on him for sure, unless they feel really, really good about another one of those quarterbacks later on.
Yeah, Jackson Dart was somebody that we've seen from the very beginning as somebody that was talked about as a good fit for the Saints. Obviously, they've been in contact over the last couple of weeks as well. People reading into maybe Alvin Kamara going up there, visiting Prime, hanging out with Colorado, going through a practice. It's been funny to see all of that for sure. And it just, I don't know, makes you love the draft because you never know what's going to happen. And there's all these little things, these tea leaves that people are over analyzing as it comes. So it's going to be a lot of fun when we get there. Other needs that you think the Saints have other than, we've talked about possibly a tight end, quarterback if it's there and it works.
Yeah. I would probably say corner is a spot that makes sense, right? You think about going back to the trade deadline last year, Marshawn Lattimore traded to the Washington Commanders to get would have turned into some pretty solid draft selections out of that. We'll see what those draft selections turn into. But then Paulson Adebo signing with the New York Giants, getting his next opportunity over in the Big Apple. And then bringing in Isaac Yiadom, I think was an excellent move by New Orleans in terms of bringing in a familiar face, somebody that they know pretty well, all these other pieces. And that is also talented. But, I think that's a position where you can continue to invest, and it's not necessarily something you have to invest in or a spot you have to invest in the first round. You can do that in the second round with one of those third round picks, however it works. So there's a lot of different spots where they can go there. I'm curious to see if a big bodied a big bodied wide receiver, my apologies, is on the docket at all for New Orleans. They have these, they've built a lot of speed in their wide receiver room, but you wonder, like Kellen Moore, when we talked to him at the league meetings, he kind of mentioned, ideally you want some people want their wide receiver room to kind of look like a basketball team. You want your center, you want your point guard, you want your big bodied guys and all these other things. But really, when it comes to Kellen Moore, as he said over and over again, he wants to identify the superpower of the players that he does have more than he's worried about going out and trying to find the superpower in, another player. But I would venture to guess that if there's an opportunity to go and get a big bodied guy with a superpower, that Kellen Moore would know what to do with that player. So I would certainly put kind of that mold of a wide receiver on pick watch for the New Orleans Saints during the draft as well.
When you say superpower, I immediately think of defensive end Cam Jordan because it feels like he has so many, the longevity that he's had,
right?
His personality, the positivity. He was on Good Morning Football talking about how he thinks that when this team is healthy, they could be the second best team in the league.
Look, this is what you need to do in the NFL is to have that kind of attitude. And I'm actually surprised to hear him say second best team in the NFL. Usually players talk about being the best team in the NFL. But look, that's the attitude that you have to have. If you're not going to have that attitude, then what are you on the field for, right? I think that's the kind of thing that Cam has always been so brilliant at throughout his career. And going on year 15, Erin, I don't think I've done anything well for 15 years at once. You know what I mean? 15 years in a row. It's never happened.
Consistently.
I've done a lot of things not well for 15 years, that's for sure. But that's something that he's always been so great at is the belief in the team. And when you look at who your leaders are in this locker room, Cam's name is one of the first names that pops up. And if Cam's out there not believing in this team, then why would anyone follow suit? So great to see him be able to, willingly go out there, have that belief, truly know that he believes it too. Like we've talked to Cam a lot and we know that he truly believes in what this team has. And I think that this is an organization that still very much feels like injuries had a major impact last year. And so staying healthy here going into 2025 would be such a big benefit for them. Should that be the case, to allow them maybe to be able to maximize themselves in a way that they weren't necessarily able to, down to their 6th, 7th, this, that, and the other all throughout the season.
Yeah, you may be right. Cam might have said top 2 teams. He might not have. positioned himself as second. So I'll have to fact check that.
I was going to say I mean, Cam, I'm surprised he didn't say the best right away. Not even top 10. I'm surprised he didn't say the best.
But it is really good to hear the confidence that he has in this team and the belief that he has in the players in the locker room and what they can add in the draft. And then looking at what Kellen Moore really wants to do as far as highlighting each person's strengths and pulling that out. And if Cam feels like it's there and Kellen feels like you can pull it out of everybody, then it's going to be really interesting to see what this team does look like in the fall. So I'm looking forward to it, and I appreciate your insight as always.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to be here with you.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Saints podcast, presented by SeatGeek. Join us 3 times per week on NewOrleansSaints.com, the Saints mobile app, or you can download the podcast on iTunes. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Saints podcast, presented by SeatGeek.